Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank the Nobel Peace Center for possibility to speak at this conference. I am grateful to Norway for supporting the human rights defenders movement. The recent document, Norwegian Guidelines for Support to Human Rights Defenders from the Norwegian government, is relevant and comprehensive. I wish if only the governments of all democratic countries have done the same. But dictatorial regimes hate human rights defenders. A week ago, Lukashenko's Ministry of Internal Affairs declared the Human Rights Center Vesna and its informational resources an extremist formation. Now even readers of their social networks can face persecution, and the human rights defenders who are in prison face an even harsher conditions. Unfortunately, the Western world rarely notices Belarus. Therefore, I will emphasize that Belarus is not Russia. Lukashenko is not Belarus. The free Belarus is the one that is genuine, open, and it chooses European democratic way. These are those ordinary people that did extraordinary things in 2020 and surprised the world as millions of Belarusians took part in peaceful protests against brazenly falsified elections. The Belarusian society still hates the dictatorship and has never agreed to its territory being used by Russia for the aggression against our good neighbors, Ukrainians. And it resists this as much as possible, including through partisan actions. That's why today this free Belarus is attempted to be destroyed and crushed. Among imprisoned are elderly, chronically ill, and mothers of many children. Relatives and friends of activists and leaders are taken hostage. People are sentenced to unimaginable terms, up to 25 years. People are holding on morally, but they're destroyed physically, that's why. People are dying in prisons like the popular artist Aleš Pushkin. Due to conditions in prison, a healthy person developed a perforated stomach ulcer, and despite the terrible pain, he was refused any timely medical help. This is, in its essence, another murder. In 2021, Aleš Beliacký knew that sooner or later he will be arrested again. However, he felt morally obliged to do everything possible for the release of already imprisoned human rights defenders and set an example for others. After the arrest, I was allowed to see him only 1 year later. The visit was through the glass. Aleš was very positive and optimistic, even though he realized the dangers he was facing. I don't know when we will see each other again. They won't be able to break him morally because he has a mission. This helped Aleš to endure the previous imprisonment by Lukashenko for 10 years ago, and it supports his spirit now that he turned 60 years behind the bars. Since his youth, the times of communist dictatorship, Aleš dedicated his life to the struggle for fundamental human rights, the right to be free, the right to choose the government, and the right to be yourself. Now, right before me, in the previous panel, Honorable Rigoberta Menchu and Hætta Isaksen talked about the right to an identity is one of the most important human rights. Lukashenko's dictatorship continues to strip Belarusians of all their rights, including the right to an identity in favor of Putin's Russia. Thousands of civil organizations were shut down, including all those involved in the revival of national culture and language. Teachers, writers, journalists, musicians, and artists are in prisons. This is how this space is cleared so that the Belarus could be used as a platform for Russian revanchism. Did the awarding of the Nobel Prize change the situation of Aleš Beliacký? He became the laureate of the award while already in the trial detention facility. In a cell without ventilation and a semi-basement, his vision deteriorated abruptly and his chronic diseases worsened greatly. But he did not have any timely access to medical care, and he still doesn't have it. The trial against Ales, who was already Nobel laureate, and his associates, Valentinom Stefanovich and Vladimir Latkovich, was a farce. False accusations, fictitious witnesses, and a pre-prepared verdict. One of the lawyers was arrested, and the other one got his license revoked. The defendants were kept handcuffed in a cage under the trial. Ales asked to conduct the hearing in Belarusian. The court refused him. This is at the same time a gross violation of human rights, but it's also an indicator. The territory is marked. Belarus, under the rule of Lukashenko, is a part of the Russian world. Ales was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Regardless of his health, he was sent to a colony that has a terrible reputation as a conveyor belt for the torture of political prisoners. All of them in Belarus are repeatedly, every now and then, sent to solitary confinement cells, where even if you're tortured, you won't file a complaint. Political prisoners are declared extremists and made to wear yellow signs on their uniforms. Doesn't it remind you something? Only months later, I received a letter from Ales with scarce information. It is much more difficult for a lawyer to get to him now. It is important for the authorities to make Ales's existence in a prison unbearable. The state propaganda contained insults to the Nobel Committee. Lukashenko probably likes to challenge others. I violate all norms of human coexistence and international law, and you can't do anything to me. From this, it seems, follows the first answer to the next question. What can be done to help political prisoners in Belarus? First and foremost, the regime must receive a united message from the democratic world. Political prisoners in our country must be released without any conditions. Any contact with authorities in Minsk is possible only after that, and under the condition of cessation of participation in aggression against Ukraine. Lukashenko's regime understands only the language of force. Negotiations with Lukashenko, behind whom is Putin's shadow, are fruitless. Therefore, I express great respect to those countries and politicians who are not tempted by pragmatism, have no illusions, and show integrity. It's time to use the mechanism of International Criminal Court and universal jurisdiction. We should rely on the firmness of international organizations, which must stand guard over democratic values and peace. The United Nations Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights defenders, Mary Lawlor, who spoke in the first panel, gave a basic understanding of dictatorships, including Belarus. But at the same time, the Secretary General of the United Nations invites Lukashenko to the Sustainable Development Goal Summit, and UN officials praise regime. Does it mean that mass repressions and complicity in criminal war is part of sustainable development? And the Red Cross doesn't monitor the situation in Belarusian prisons because it is engaged in other things. The head of the Belarusian Red Cross, Dmitry Shovtsov, participates together with Lukashenko's authorities in the forced deportation of Ukrainian children to Belarus from the Ukrainian territories occupied by Russia. The Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe recognized it as a genocide. The principled policy of democratic community should make it impossible for the regime to have an easy existence, show that both Lukashenko and his accomplices will bear the responsibility. What to do immediately? First of all, keep the Belarusian issue in the sphere of attention of democratic societies. I hope that the name and status of the Nobel laureate will help not to forget Belarusian victims and heroes. On the whole, you need to do the next. To tell the names of political prisoners and cover their stories in the media. To demand immediate access to prisons and colonies for medics, the right to send medication to prisoners, and to demand from the International Red Cross to stop the illegal activities of its Belarusian branch, and to ensure that international experts could conduct checks of the detention conditions of prisoners. In connection with the actual destruction of the lawyers' bar in Belarus, initiate international investigations of the case and send appeals to specialized UN bodies, for example, Committee Against Torture, to send letters to political prisoners, understanding that the most of them won't reach them, but the international solidarity, the number and geography of the letters will affect the prison officials, support relatives of prisoners. An effective mechanism is symbolic co-parenthood, guardianship of political prisoners by renowned politicians and public figures for some concrete political prisoners. Belarusian human rights defenders and other brave people are captured in Lukashenko's prison because they want to see their country free from the dictatorship and Russia's enslavement. Freedom to Olесь Beletsky, freedom to all political prisoners in Belarus, and to the people of Vesna and in the world. Thank you for your attention.